Newfoundland Hobbyist is sponsored by paulsfinest.com, Mid-Island Motorsports located in Springdale, wildmedkits.ca, and Robinson's General Store located in Middle Arm. Hey, I'm Kyle, and you're watching the Newfoundland Hobbyist. Really appreciate you tuning into the show this evening. Now, if you didn't catch last week's episode, or it's your first time here watching the show, you missed the building of a custom knife. And this is being special designed and built for my daughter, which I'm really excited about. And it's built to match her first firearm, which we talked about in last week's episode. My wife and I gave our little girl her first rifle this year, a little .22 Rascal made by Savage Arms. And that is what I've titled this pattern, the Rascal. And really happy with it. As you can see, it's quite small, very petite in the hand here to fit her little small hands, and but still built to offer a lot of capability as she grows. A full-grown man could use this knife beautifully. It'd make a beautiful little caping knife or a neck knife, camp knife, things like that. What they call a companion or a backup companion. Really awesome pattern. Now, you might have noticed what we don't have yet is a covering for the blade. And today, that's what we're going to be getting to. One of my favorite hobbies, that is leatherworking. I have a small piece of hide here. I brought out this small leftover piece because it's a lot easier than bringing out the full roll if I can get away with just having this one. What we have to do first is draw up some designs, because remember, this is a brand new pattern, a brand new template. A lot of times, like a lot of my knives that I build, because I am a knife maker, in case you didn't know, a lot of my knives I build are based off of patterns, and I already have sheaths that can work. I've made sheaths that can work even if it's a slightly newer design knife. I usually have some sheath, and I keep all my templates. I usually have some template there for a sheath that can work. I don't think I have anything for this, so we're going to draw something up, special design for this knife, the Rascal. Now, whenever I'm coming up with something new, a new design, a new pattern for a sheath, you never want to place your sketches on your leather. You never want that to be your trial and error, because this material is quite expensive. You can't afford to go wasting it. So you want some type of paper. Last week I suggested cardstock. I keep cardstock on hand all the time for your pattern making and your template making. It's the real stuff, because you can cut it out. You have a thick piece of cardstock, something with substance that you can trace out designs and other surfaces with. It's really nice for layout. So if you can, keep cardstock on hand in your workshop or your craft area for doing designs like that. Now, the first thing to consider whenever you're making a knife sheath like this, the main thing to consider for me is how is it going to be worn. So oftentimes a little small knife like this will be worn as a neck knife. It would be very standard. Usually a smaller knife like this is not worn on the belt. It's a neck knife because it's right there, it's small, it doesn't have too much weight hanging off your neck. But something really important to consider with little children, a neck knife requires a lace to be worn around the neck. Now, for a grown man, that's not as big a deal, because you're able to break a lace or snip it or untie it. You have the mental capacity and you have the physical ability to break yourself free from that. For a child, the chance of, sorry to be graphic here, but the line drawing tight or the line catching on a limb or something when they're walking, or just them accidentally getting tangled in it themselves, it's not a situation you want to put your children in. So let's steer away from the line around the neck for children. It's not even quite as bad, even though I think necklaces are probably frowned upon for kids too. But at least a necklace tends to be really close to the neckline. It's not going to catch on as much stuff or be out there. But a neck knife down here, when you've got probably 8 inches down on either side, that's out for, and you know, bending over and catching on stuff, you don't want to do that. So again, for children, let's steer away from the concept of a neck knife. So that leaves us 2 options. Either a belt sheath, so something with a belt loop, or no carrying fashion at all, just like a pocket slip. And I think that's where I'm leaning with this. Kids don't often wear belts. My little girl's not wearing a belt, and I can't see that happening in the near future. It's just not as much a necessity, and little kids don't often wear belts. So for that reason, I don't think having a big loop on the sheath and bulking it up will be the right idea. I think a real nice pocket slip, or just a small slip type sheath that can fit cleanly into a pocket or into a little backpack or something, if we were to go off in the woods, or to stick in the glove box of the bike, or I can carry inside my pocket and sit with her when it's time to do some whittling or to make a little fire stick or something like that. I can pull it out of my pocket and she can use it. In the next, say, 3 years, that is the capacity this knife will be used for. I got a little bit of concern when I put up the video last week's episode. Some of you were concerned, and I appreciate the concerns. Some of you were concerned about a 3-year-old, 4-year-old having a knife. This will be used in a very controlled setting. Believe me, I'm not sending her off to play in the yard with her own little custom fixed blade. It will be in a very controlled, let's sit down together, probably for the first while, even holding it with her, both our hands on the knife, and carving, teaching the techniques, instilling those techniques at a young age. So thank you for your concern, but we've got that covered. But I think a pocket slip, nice, petite, so that I can carry it in my pocket, is the way to go here. So let me show you how I go about designing a knife sheath. I would normally do a rough sketch. This is another decision you have to make. How much of the knife will be covered? You could have a sheath just run right tight to here. If it was going to be a neck sheath, maybe that's where I'd go, to have my sheath run right to here, and maybe a retention strap. In this case, I want a little more coverage than that. I want this knife to sit down inside a sheath. So I'll sketch so far up the handle. You want plenty on the end to be able to pull the knife out, because leather does tend to pinch on stuff. Let's go right here. Now, if we remember, it's going to fold over. So we need room for a welt. Leave a little extra space. So a welt will trim along our edge like this. And then we need room for our stitch line and a rivet. So I will just rough sketch outside like this. Remember, this is our top line. And then usually, just because of the way leather works, we'll have a straight fold line. Now that fold line could go a couple different ways. You can play with your angles, but you don't want things to get wonky or skewed. So we'll probably go straight down like this. Let's maybe even do something like this. This is an interesting design. It's a little more tricky than you'd think, but it works. And I'm going to show you how this fold back here will work, because this is our fold line. Now, the trick here, and it took me a little while to learn this, the trick is to only cut half of your design, because of course you need to create both sides. You want this to be mirrored. We'll cut out our pattern here, and again, only cut exactly what you want to be mirrored. Right back to here, just like that. Now what you can do, since your cut line went right to the edge of the mirror, fold and crease. And this is, you can see where that cardstock is shining. It's nice and rigid there. Now we can cut out our other half and we have a perfectly mirrored image. So here's our template for our sheath. I'll usually sit it in there now. See how much room we're going to have for a welt. Now you get to pick out your specific section of leather you want to use. You can be as conservative as possible with this, or you can pick the piece that has the grain structure that you want for that particular project. For me, it's a mix of both. I'm not going to be wasteful, but I also want a really nice, clean piece of leather. That's one of the beautiful things. One of the things I really love about leather hide is that, of course, it's a living thing, or it came off of a living thing, a thing that was once living. And it has so much character. It has a life of its own. The grain and the pores and the blemishes at times, and well, it has a whole story of its own. It's just beautiful, beautiful material to work with. The idea that it came off of an animal is just incredible. Now a really cool tool called a skiver. As you can see, it's curved, but it takes a razor blade, and they're actually really difficult to get in, and I don't tend to like them when they're brand new. I like them a little bit dull. They keep you from being able to dig the leather too much. The purpose of my skiver today is this piece of leather this small has a lot of resistance to bending. It just doesn't want to crease. It's really dense here in the middle. So by just taking this curved blade, I can just hollow out some of that middle portion. And I find having a slightly duller blade with a little bit of use on it, helps you just scrape away just the slightest amount like that. Now don't forget to dye the inside of your sheath before you start applying any glue. You won't easily forgive yourself, so that's what I'm going to do now. You can dye all the way down to the toe of the sheath, although you don't need to. It'll never be seen again unless it's by someone that's rebuilding, restitching, rewelting the sheath, which can be done in years. That's another beautiful thing about leather. Again, here comes those popsicle sticks. I'm telling you, start stocking them. Very handy. Stir sticks, mixing sticks, a glue spreader. They're just so handy. So I will glue one side of the welt. Usually the coarse side first because it seems to have the best hold. Of course you have coarse fibers mixing with coarse fibers. That makes good sense.
The Newfoundland Hobbyist is sponsored by EdgeProInc.com, ABS Bussing in Middle Arm, By the Sea Inn and Cafe, located in Kings Point, and Noble's Timber Mart, with locations in Springdale and Bay Verte.
Now for our stitch groover. Our overstitch wheel. Now it's time to stitch a beautiful saddle stitch. I've seen hints in the comments section of my YouTube videos and stuff as this project goes on, talking about the safety concerns and the necessity of building such a product for my little girl, for a toddler, or having a rifle, how unnecessary or unsafe or whatever the running line is. People have concerns, and I understand that. The idea is that I'm trying to foster a sense of competence, skill, and care. I think those would be three good words that I'd choose. A .22 rifle compared to just a BB gun that doesn't really need any care. You guys have all seen the little Daisy BB guns that are almost throwaway. They're so cheap. They're not accurate. They really don't teach a lot about the skill of shooting, other than the concept of you can teach things like gun safety, and you can do those types of things with Nerf guns as well. But the idea of having a rifle that is accurate enough that you have to care for it properly. You know, it matters whether or not you clean and oil a .22 after you get it soaked. It matters that the rifling in the barrel is kept clean. So it invites an opportunity for me to teach my daughter something very important about the care, the long-term care of an item. The same thing goes with building a knife like this. I could get her a little $2 or $3 gas station knife or dollar store knife or what have you. But the idea of long-term care would not be there. This is something that has value. I hope this will last for decades for my daughter. I hope that she can have it when she's a grown girl and look at it. And wouldn't that be something, eh? But the idea that this is something that has value and should be cared for, and we can do that because it's something that is deserving of that care. $2 Swiss Army knife, you know what happens. I've gone through probably dozens growing up. They just get thrown in a box, or they get thrown down when you're done playing, or they're left outside in a sandbox or whatever. Something like this teaches proper care when you come in from out playing. If it was wet, you dry it, you oil it, you keep it sharp. And it invites so much opportunity for learning and skill, and it impregnates a mentality. It might be a strange word, but it leaves a mentality, it sets a mentality in someone's mind, I think, that things ought to be valued and cared for and given respect. And I think giving items that have value to start with help leave that sentiment behind. A little bit of pure beeswax on my edges. A little bit of friction from just a plain dry wood dowel. Now I know some of you thought I forgot, but I didn't. We're up for the most daunting part of the project now, the very last step, and it had to be the last step, because to put this in the handle and then finish grind, of course you're going to take that end off the cap. So this had to be put on a finished handle. I could have did it in the last episode when we finished up the handle, but I thought I'd leave it for the last step of the project. So I'm just brainstorming here now how to perfectly, cleanly, precisely do this without destroying that gorgeous, gorgeous handle. This is a challenging part. Let's see what we can do. Let's do as much damage control here as possible. Okay, here is the first round. And it was a CCI quiet. So we got that nice CCI badge there. Very nice. My solution to hold it, because that's the biggest problem here, is to friction fit a piece of dowel like that. Ooh, here's the scary part. No, this is not even the scariest part. Whoa! Don't want to lose that. Now comes the most daunting part of the project. Oh boy, I can't believe I'm going to do this. Okay, here we go. I'm going to add a nice little bed of Starbond gap filler there now. This is their thick cyanoacrylate glue. So it should work really nicely in this scenario. I hope I didn't just put way too much, but I want enough to really set this cap in nicely. Got just enough wiggle room there to move it around, to kind of knead it where I want. There we go. That's where I want it to sit. And now, as you guys know, my sheaths, or my leather work in general, always gets finished off with a little bit of mink oil. It smells good, makes the leather feel good, and most importantly, conditions it and gives it some resistance to moisture, which you definitely want, because leather does tend to soak in moisture, and too much of it will cause it to break down. So, let's give it a nice coat. Use the heat of your skin, a little bit of friction there to rub it, allow it to go into the leather. A bristle brush here, just to get it in around the stitching. And what I also find it does is it kind of blends and smooths over the stitching, and if there's any little fibers up from the stitch, that little bit of wax or oil, a little bit of paste there, just helps gel all that down and give it a nice, smooth, even finish. And now, except for sharpening, which I'll leave till later on, until perhaps after I give it to her or something, maybe I'll save that for another episode, who knows. But except for that, my daughter's first knife is done. There it is, our oiled sheath, hand stitched, a beautiful saddle stitch. Let's pull it out of its shell. Nice strong grip there. Take a look at our casing there. The end of our shell. First knife, first rifle, first shot fired. I hope the start of a life full of learning and appreciation, respect. Didn't that casing turn out nice, huh? A little bit risky, but I think well worth it. Just adds that extra little bit of over the top feature that I was looking for this knife. So that's it for this episode. I really hope you enjoyed it. I certainly enjoyed having you here, and I really appreciate you guys watching. As always, I'd like to give a big shout out to my sponsors. They help make this show possible, and if at all possible, it would be great if you guys could support them. As always, make sure you tune in next week to the Newfoundland Hobbyists.